I walked into the performance review room, with my hands trembling, just enough to betray my nerves. The fluorescent lights hummed above, casting their pale glow across the table, making the space feel less like an office and more like an interrogation chamber. My boss sat there already, leaning back in his oversized chair, a grin curling at his lips before I even sat down. He thrived on these moments. Everyone knew it. While most managers use performance reviews to guide, to encourage, to measure progress, he used them like weapons. His office was a stage, and I was just his unwilling actor, cast to play the part of failure. "Sit," he said, like an order instead of an invitation. I placed my folder on the table, filled with reports, metrics, and undeniable proof of my performance. But his eyes never glanced at it. They were locked on me, sharp and amused, like he had already written the ending of this script. "So," he began, dragging out the word like a predator circling its prey, "why don't you tell me why you think you deserve to stay here another quarter?" The question hit me like a slap. Deserve? My record spoke for itself. I had exceeded targets, won new clients, and even earned written praise from executives. But with him, none of that mattered. He wasn't interested in numbers or success. He was interested in control. I opened my mouth, ready to calmly lay out my achievements. But before I could form a single sentence, he cut me off. He leaned forward, eyes narrowing, and began listing concerns. Not real. Ones, fabrications, half-truths, twisted until they dripped with poison. "You missed deadlines," he claimed. False, I had finished weeks early. "Your teamwork is weak," he pressed. Another lie. I was the one teammates came to when he abandoned them. "And frankly," he added with a sneer, "your attitude is slipping. You're ungrateful." Each word was a dart aimed at the one place he knew it would sting. My pride. My chest tightened. My throat ached as though his words had weight. I kept reminding myself to hold steady, to not give him what he wanted. I wasn't going to cry. Not here, not in front of him. But then, against my will, a tear slid down my cheek. And that's when it happened. He pushed back his chair so suddenly the legs screeched against the floor. Then, unbelievably, he stood and began to sway. His arms jerked, his feet shuffled in a mocking rhythm. A dance, a victory dance. "Finally!" he crowed, clapping his hands once. The mass cracks. The room tilted for a moment as humiliation surged through me like fire. My boss, my supposed leader, was celebrating my pain. He wanted me to crumble, to fall apart so he could feel taller. He wasn't satisfied with cutting me down. He needed to stomp on the pieces. For a moment, I just sat there, frozen. Then I clenched my fists under the table, nails biting into my palms, grounding me. I wouldn't give him more. I wouldn't sob, I wouldn't plead. I would remember, and I would make him regret it. He laughed again, moving his arms like a twisted parody of a cheerleader, basking in the humiliation he thought he'd achieved. But when I didn't break, when I didn't beg, something in his grin faltered. That was when I leaned forward, met his eyes and whispered, "This isn't over." For the first time, his smile faltered. Just for a flicker of a second. Then he chuckled again, louder than before, trying to cover his unease. "Big words," he mocked. "But we both know who writes the final chapter here." He thought he was untouchable. He thought this room, these walls, gave him immunity. He didn't know what I knew. He didn't know what was already in motion outside. Because while he reveled in his little dance, while he wasted time celebrating a tear, someone else was watching. And that was when his phone lit up on the desk, flashing the extension of HR. His laughter died in his throat. He stared at the blinking light, hand hovering just above the receiver. He hesitated. I sat perfectly still, my face calm now, the tear long dried. "Go on," I said softly. "Pick it up." The phone kept blinking, the sharp red light casting tiny pulses against his desk. For a man who always had the upper hand, the hesitation on his face was almost comical. He stared at it like it was a trap waiting to spring, like if he touched it, something irreversible would happen. "Go on," I repeated, my voice calm now, almost too calm. My words seemed to crawl under his skin. He glanced at me, then back at the phone, then finally snatched the receiver. "Hello?" His voice, usually dripping with arrogance, had an edge of caution. He listened for a moment, his jaw tightening. Then he forced out a fake laugh, though his eyes flickered nervously toward me. "Now? Yes, of course. I'll come right away." When he hung up, the air between us thickened. He didn't say a word at first, just stood there, looming, like he was trying to reassert his dominance. "Looks like HR needs me," he muttered, his voice clipped. "Don't move." "We're not finished here." But I smiled, just a small, knowing curve of my lips, and that unsettled him more than anything. The door slammed shut behind him. For the first time in what felt like hours, I let myself breathe. My heart pounded so hard it shook my ribs, but beneath the adrenaline, something else stirred. Not fear, not shame. Something darker. Something sharper. I stood slowly and wandered the room. His office told a story he thought no one could read. The self-congratulatory plaques on the walls, the expensive liquor in his cabinet, the hidden locked drawer at the bottom of his desk. He was a man who built his empire on intimidation and shadows, and he thought those shadows would always protect him. But shadows have a way of hiding secrets. I pressed my hand against the desk drawer. Locked, of course. I wasn't reckless enough to force it, not yet. But the itch to know what he kept hidden there gnawed at me. The hallway outside echoed faintly. Voices. Low, sharp, tense. I crept to the door, cracked it open, and listened. "You've gone too far this time." HR's voice was firm, clipped with frustration. "You don't know what you're talking about," my boss snapped back. "She's weak, unfit. I was just testing her resilience." "Dancing?" The HR manager's voice cut like glass. "Mocking an employee until they break? That's not resilience testing. That's harassment." I froze, my pulse spiking. Harassment. The word hung in the air like a thunderclap. My boss laughed bitterly. "You think anyone will believe you over me? I've been here 10 years. I'm the reason this department even runs. She'll be gone before the quarter's end. And you—" his voice dropped. "Venomous. You'd better watch how far you push this." Silence, heavy silence. I backed away from the door, heart racing. He was untouchable. At least that's what he believed. And for years, maybe he was right. But something in HR's tone lingered with me. They weren't backing down, not completely. The seed of doubt had been planted. When he returned, his face was flushed, his jaw clenched tight. He didn't sit this time. He loomed over me, leaning against the desk, forcing me to look up at him. "Enjoy that little show?" he hissed. I didn't flinch. "More than you think." For a moment, his hand twitched like he wanted to slam it down on the table, to scare me back into silence. But then he smiled, a chilling, venomous smile. "You have no idea what you've started." He turned his back and scribbled something in my file with deliberate strokes. I couldn't see what he wrote, but the way his pen dug into the paper made me uneasy. He closed it with a snap, then leaned in close. "You'll regret this," he whispered. "People who cross me always do." I met his gaze without blinking. "Maybe, or maybe you'll regret underestimating me." The room fell into a tense silence, a dangerous stalemate, and just then his phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't HR's extension flashing. It was an unknown number. He glanced at it, confusion flashing across his face before picking it up. His expression shifted almost instantly. First confusion, then shock, then fear. He muttered something I couldn't catch, then slammed the receiver down. His hand trembled slightly as he turned back toward me. "Who have you been talking to?" he demanded. I tilted my head, keeping my face unreadable. "What makes you think it was me?" He narrowed his eyes, but for the first time since I'd met him, there was no arrogance in his expression, only suspicion, only unease. And in that moment I knew something had cracked in him. He wasn't untouchable anymore. But what he didn't know, what I hadn't, yet told anyone, was that his greatest secret was already in my hands. The tremor in his hand was small, but it was there. For a man who thrived on control, who built his entire persona on dominance, even the slightest crack was telling. He tried to cover it, straightening his posture, forcing that smirk back onto his face. But I had already seen it, the fear. "Don't play games with me," he said, his voice low, measured. "I know you've been stirring trouble." I tilted my head, watching him like he had watched me earlier, silent and unblinking. The silence made him uncomfortable, more than any words could have. He slammed his fist onto the desk, rattling the pen holder, then leaned across the table so close I could smell the bitter mix of coffee and whiskey on his breath. "You think HR cares about you?" he sneered. "They've seen employees come and go 100 times. They'll smile, nod, pretend to care, and then they'll side with me. They always do. Maybe once that was true. Maybe he had gotten away with years of cruelty, years of manipulation, because no one dared to challenge him. But things were different now. He just didn't know it yet, Because what he didn't realize was that I wasn't just surviving, I was documenting. Every outburst, every slur, every threat, screenshots of late-night emails, recordings of meetings, witnesses who had been too afraid to speak until they saw me standing up. Piece by piece, I had been building a wall of evidence, waiting for the moment when it would matter most, and his little victory dance had just become the final nail. I leaned back in my chair, my calmness disarming him. "You know what I think?" I said softly. "I think the higher you climb, the harder the fall." His face reddened, and for a second I thought he might actually explode. But instead he laughed, a hollow, brittle laugh. "Cute speech," he said. "But remember, falls don't happen by themselves. Someone has to push, and I don't think you've got the strength." That was where he was wrong. Before I could respond, the office door opened and HR stepped in. A man and a woman, both wearing the practiced, unreadable expressions of professionals who had walked into too many conflicts. But there was a sharpness in their eyes, a tension in the air that told me this wasn't routine. "Could we have a word?" the HR manager asked, directing her gaze at him. He stiffened. "We're in the middle of a review." "It can wait," she replied. "This can't." For the briefest second, panic flickered across his face. Then he plastered on that smile again, the one he wore like armor, and excused himself. The door clicked shut behind them, leaving me in silence. I waited. Minutes stretched like hours. Every tick of the clock echoed through the room, building suspense until it was unbearable. And then, muffled through the walls, I heard it, his voice raised, desperate, trying to fight back. "You don't have proof," he barked. "It's her word against mine." There was silence, then the HR woman's voice, calm but cutting. "Actually, it isn't." My pulse quickened. Proof. They had something. Or maybe they had everything. When the door finally opened again, my boss stepped inside. His face pale, his jaw set tight. He wouldn't look at me. He just grabbed his file from the desk and muttered, "This isn't over." But I could see it in his eyes. It had already begun. He dropped into his chair, with the weight of a man who'd just come, back from the battlefield. His hands gripped the edge of the desk, knuckles white, as if he could anchor himself to the power that was slipping through his fingers. He didn't look at me, not right away. When he finally did, his eyes were darker, colder, like glass about to shatter. "Do you think this is funny?" he hissed. I raised an eyebrow, feigning innocence. "What part?" He slammed his fist on the desk again. But this time it wasn't anger. It was desperation. "They've been watching me, recording meetings, interviewing staff. Someone's been feeding them information." His gaze narrowed. "And I think we both know who." I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table, matching his intensity. "Maybe you should ask yourself why so many people had so much to say." His nostrils flared, but beneath the fury I could see the doubt creeping in. For the first time, he wasn't sure how many enemies he had made. He wasn't sure where the knife was coming from. He grabbed his file, flipped it open, and started scribbling notes furiously, as if writing something down would give him back control. I couldn't see the words, but I didn't need to. I knew what he was doing, trying to build a case against me. Retaliation. He was already setting traps. "Let me give you some advice," he said finally, voice steady but hollow. "In this place, survival isn't about being good. It's about being feared. I've lasted 10 years because no one dared to cross me. Maybe they were just waiting," I murmured. His pen froze mid-sentence. He looked up at me, eyes burning. Careful. But the more he threatened, the calmer I became. Because what he didn't know was that I had stopped being afraid weeks ago. I had been preparing for this. Every cruel word, every twisted demand, every humiliation, documented. He thought this was a sudden ambush, but it was a storm I had been building piece by piece, waiting for the moment he made the biggest mistake of all, and mocking me in that performance review, dancing like a child in victory. That was it. He didn't know that my phone, discreetly placed in my lap during the review, had captured every second of it. The jeers, the taunts, the dance, the laughter. Proof undeniable and raw. He thought HR had shaken him already. He hadn't even seen the full storm yet. The door opened again. HR stepped back inside, this time with a folder in hand. The woman set it down on the desk between us. "We'll need to schedule a formal follow-up," she said evenly. "But for now, you should both be aware that an investigation is underway." His jaw tightened. An investigation, he repeated, his tone laced with contempt. Into what? Performance management? Into misconduct, she replied, unflinching. The word hung in the air like a verdict. He barked out a laugh, but it was brittle, breaking at the edges. You can't be serious. I've built this department. Without me, it falls apart. Her expression didn't change. Then I suppose we'll see if it can stand without you. For the first time since I'd known him, he didn't have a comeback. He just sat there, breathing hard, fists clenched on the desk. When HR left again, the silence between us was deafening. Finally, he turned to me, his voice barely above a whisper. You think you've won, but you don't know what I'm capable of. I leaned back, smiling faintly. Neither do you. He narrowed his eyes, studying me, searching for the weakness he was so used to finding, but there wasn't one anymore. Not after what he'd done. Not after the line he had crossed. And then, almost as if fate was mocking him, his phone buzzed again. This time he didn't answer right away. He stared at the caller ID, his face draining of color. I watched him carefully. His lips moved soundlessly, like he was repeating the name flashing across the screen to himself. Who is it? I asked softly. He didn't respond. He just picked up the phone, hand shaking slightly. Hello? His voice cracked. I couldn't hear the response, but whatever it was made his face collapse into something I'd never seen before. Not anger, not arrogance, something closer to fear. He hung up without a word and sat back in his chair, staring at the wall like he'd seen a ghost. And that was when I knew his past was finally catching up with him. He didn't move for a long time, just sat there, staring at the blank wall as though it might swallow him whole. The arrogance that had always dripped from him was gone, stripped away in the span of a single phone call. His chest rose and fell heavily, each breath louder than the ticking of the clock. Finally, he spoke. You don't understand, he whispered, more to himself than to me. This can't come back now. I leaned forward, my curiosity sharpened like a blade. What can't? His eyes darted to mine, wild, almost feral, before he masked it with that cold sneer again. None of your business. He grabbed his pen and scribbled furiously in his notebook, though his hand shook so badly the lines tore through the page. For once I didn't interrupt. I just watched him unravel. Because here's the thing about men like him, they believe their power makes them untouchable. But the higher they climb, the more secrets they bury. And when those secrets start clawing their way out of the ground, it isn't their enemies who destroy them. It's themselves. I stood quietly and walked toward the shelves lining his office wall. He didn't stop me, too lost in his frantic notes. His phone clutched tight in his other hand as if waiting for it to ring again. The shelves were a shrine to his ego. Framed awards, photos of handshakes with executives, even a plaque he had clearly bought for himself that read, Visionary Leader of the Year. But behind all the polished smiles in those photos, I noticed something. His eyes never matched the grin. There was always a flicker of tension, like he knew the camera was catching a lie. Do you ever wonder, I said softly, my back to him, how many people are waiting for you to fall? How many would celebrate it? His laugh came out hollow. That's the price of leadership. You don't make friends at the top. I turned to face him. No, but you do make enemies. The pen snapped in his grip. Ink spilled across his fingers, staining them black. He cursed under his breath, grabbed a tissue and tried to wipe it off. But the ink only smeared, darker, messier. His frustration cracked into rage, and he slammed the notebook shut, the sound echoing like a gavel. I don't care what HR thinks, he spat. They can dig all they want. They'll find nothing. I've covered my tracks too well. The confidence in his voice didn't match the panic in his eyes. He was lying and he knew it. Before I could respond, the door opened again. HR entered, this time with someone else trailing behind them. A man in a suit, unfamiliar, but with an authority that filled the room. His presence was different, colder, sharper. Mr. Kavanaugh, the man said, his tone clipped. We need to speak privately. My boss, Kavanaugh, froze. His face drained of color at the sound of his own name spoken like that. As if dragged into the light, he started to protest, but the HR manager cut him off. Now, he shot me one last look, one that carried more venom than words ever could. But beneath it I saw the cracks, fear, doubt, paranoia. He followed them out, the door clicking shut behind him. I sat there in the silence, my heart pounding, a strange mix of triumph and dread swirling inside me. Something bigger was happening. Bigger than I had planned. Bigger than just a performance review gone wrong. Because whoever that man in the suit was, Kavanaugh was afraid of him, deeply afraid. I waited, the minutes stretching into half an hour. Then the muffled voices in the hallway returned, raised this time. "You said this was buried." Kavanaugh's voice cracked, desperate. "Buried doesn't mean gone," the stranger replied coolly. "Files surface. People talk. And if what we've heard is true..." The voices trailed off, too far for me to catch. But my blood ran cold. What files? What truth? When the door finally opened again, Kavanaugh stumbled back in, his face ashen. He didn't sit. He didn't speak. He just stood there, staring at me like I was the rope tightening around his throat. I rose slowly, walked past him, and whispered as I passed, "You should be careful. Ghosts don't stay buried forever." He spun toward me, but before he could say a word, his phone buzzed again. This time he didn't answer. He just stared at the screen, trembling. And in that moment, I knew, whatever secrets he had buried, they were clawing their way to the surface. Kavanaugh's face was pale, his lips pressed tight as though every word he wanted to say would betray him. He paced behind his desk like a caged animal, his phone still buzzing in his hand. Each vibration seemed to rattle him deeper into panic. Finally, he snapped, slamming the phone onto the desk. "This is all your fault," he spat, pointing at me like a man grasping for control. "You think you've won something here? You've opened a door you don't understand." I didn't move. I just watched him spiral, letting the silence stretch. Because silence, I had learned, was more powerful than anger. Silence forced people to fill the space with their own confessions. His chest heaved. His hand went to the locked drawer at the bottom of his desk, the one I had noticed earlier. He rattled it, cursed under his breath, then yanked the key from his pocket. For a moment, I caught a glimpse of raw desperation in his eyes. He unlocked it with shaking fingers, pulled out a thick brown envelope, and clutched it like it was life itself. He turned toward me, his face flushed, sweat glistening on his temple. "You don't know what's in here," he said, almost breathless. "If this comes out, everything I've built, everything I've done, it'll all burn." My pulse quickened. I hadn't expected him to show me anything. But fear makes even the cruelest men reckless. I took a step closer, lowering my voice. Then maybe it's time the fire started. His eyes widened, and for a second I thought he might actually strike me. But then he faltered, his hand tightening on the envelope as though it might shield him. Before either of us could move, the door opened again. The suited man reappeared, this time with two others behind him, one carrying a small black briefcase. Their presence filled the office with an authority Kavanaugh couldn't mimic, no matter how hard he tried. He froze, the envelope still clutched in his hand. "Mr. Kavanaugh," the man said coolly, "we'll be taking that now." Kavanaugh's jaw clenched. He looked from them to me, his eyes wild as if he was realizing, too late, that the walls he had built around himself were crumbling. "This isn't over," he whispered hoarsely. "Not for me, and definitely not for you." But when the stranger extended his hand, firm and unyielding, Kavanaugh surrendered the envelope. And in that instant, I knew the endgame had already begun. The envelope looked so ordinary in the suited man's grip, yet the way Kavanaugh's face drained of color told me it was anything but. It was heavy, not with paper, but with years of buried sins. He reached toward it instinctively, only to have one of the other men step forward. A wall of steel in a tailored suit. Kavanaugh recoiled. For the first time, he looked small. I had imagined this moment countless times. Seeing him cornered, powerless, stripped of his smug confidence. But reality was sharper. It was like watching a king stripped of his crown, forced to face the truth that his throne had been built on lies. The suited man glanced at me, his expression unreadable. "You'll want to stay," he said. "What comes next concerns you too." My throat tightened. "What do you mean?" He didn't answer. Instead, he slid the envelope across Kavanaugh's desk and opened it with careful precision. Papers spilled out, along with a thin flash drive sealed in plastic. Kavanaugh lunged, his voice cracking with fury. "You don't have the authority to—" "Sit down," the man interrupted, his tone flat but razor-edged. "This is bigger than authority. You've hidden enough." The room went dead quiet. The papers were spread across the desk. I caught glimpses, signatures, off-the-books transactions, falsified reports. But it was the photographs tucked between them that stole my breath. Images of late-night meetings in smoky bars, briefcases exchanged in shadows, contracts signed under names that weren't real, And then, one picture that made my blood run cold. It was of me. Not now, but years ago, fresh out of school, wide-eyed, standing in a conference room I barely remembered. And there he was beside me, Kavanaugh, his hand resting on my shoulder like a mentor guiding his protege. Beneath the photograph was a note scrawled in ink. Promising asset. Keep close. My stomach turned. Asset, not employee. Not colleague, asset. Kavanaugh saw my reaction and let out a bitter laugh. Now you see? You were never chosen because of talent. You were chosen because I needed leverage. Because you were useful. The words hit harder than any insult he'd ever hurled. I wanted to scream, to tear the file apart, but the suited man raised a hand. Keep looking. More documents surfaced. Emails tying Kavanaugh to fraud, shell companies, even personal accounts siphoning funds meant for employee pensions. But beneath all of it was something worse. Something deliberate. The way he had cataloged people like me. Notes about weaknesses, vulnerabilities, even private details he should never have known. He hadn't just managed a company. He had collected lives like chess pieces. Kavanaugh slammed his hand on the desk. Enough! His voice cracked, desperation bleeding through. You don't understand, none of you do. If this gets out, they'll come for all of us, not just me. Even you, he said, locking his eyes on mine. I felt my skin crawl. What are you talking about? He hesitated, then leaned forward, lowering his voice until it was almost a whisper. This company isn't just mine. It's a front, a machine. And once the people above me find out you've meddled, he smirked bitterly, though the sweat on his brow betrayed his fear. You'll wish you never stepped foot in this office. The suited man didn't flinch. He simply picked up the flash drive and slipped it into the waiting briefcase. We'll deal with the machine. You, he said coldly, are finished. Security entered without a word. For a moment I thought Kavanaugh might resist, might make one last scene, but instead his shoulders slumped. His eyes darted to the ground, and he let them take him by the arms. As he passed me, he leaned in close, his breath hot against my ear. This isn't over, he whispered. You're tied to this now. When they come knocking, don't expect anyone to save you. And just like that, he was gone, swallowed by the hallway and the waiting shadows beyond. The suited man closed the briefcase with a snap and finally turned to me. You've done well, he said, though his tone offered no comfort. But he was right about one thing. You're in deeper than you realize. My chest tightened. What does that mean? He paused, studying me with the kind of gaze that strips away layers you didn't know you had. Then he gave the faintest smile. It means the game has only just begun, and that's where the shadows finally close in. What seemed like the end was only the beginning. This is Karma Unfolded, where every secret finds its reckoning. Don't forget to subscribe.